how can I be more positive on my day to day? I think that was kind of like step one for me, because it's in such a dark spot. And then it started to be more about habits and getting myself out of bed, because I had this very bad habit of, after I'd come home from work, I would turn on Game of Thrones and I would just binge watch it for like until the wee hours of the night, like that was like my routine, and I had no desire to do more than that. I think partially just because of like the depression, but also because of just, it feels so comfortable, right? It feels so comfortable to like come home, and especially after a long day at work that is new to you, and you've used a lot of brain power to learn a bunch of things during the day. You're just so exhausted that that's kind of all you want to do. But once I started to break myself out of that cycle and start investing into other things, like I already knew I was so ambitious, like what was the new thing that I was going to pursue right outside of my job. And so I started to get into more books and started to read more books. I started to look at courses and try to figure out, okay, like what is it that I want to be doing outside of my job? Because I knew, just being at a job isn't something for me. So how am I going to start getting out of that? So it was really just like a period of three or so years where I started to just build new habits and start to have new inputs. Like I got some coaching done, and like those coaches really did help me change my mindset a lot. And so that was kind of the next step of like, now I'm leveling up my mindset and starting to build newer and better habits that were going to feed my growth. And so it was just kind of a snowball effect from there, I would say. And it's always a practice too. So after I started to get some coaching, I started going back to church, and I started to learn a little bit more about my own self-worth and start to develop that. And especially for women, I think self-worth is an area where we struggle in, just, from being little and going all the way up into old age. And when I started to learn about how worthy I am just from a godly perspective, it started to translate into other areas of my life. And I can really say that was owed to my community at church as well. Like I met some really incredible women who are, around my age, maybe a little bit older, who really kind of instilled their values into me, and not because they were like teaching it at me, but because they just lived it, and they shared things about themselves that I was like, that's how I want to be, like I want to follow that example. Like that's the kind of woman that I would like to be. So, let me start changing some things in my life to help me get to that place. And so since then, it's really been about that. It's like, who do I want to be, and how can I work on being that person on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you said, which was positivity, is so huge. And then mindset, I mean, it's difficult to reframe your mind. If you're like so used to negativity and thinking a certain way and being pessimistic, making that switch can be really difficult. But it really comes down to the habits, like you mentioned, and training yourself and catching yourself whenever, you're negative, and flipping that into a positive somehow. And I think we all struggle with that from time to time, like we're not all perfect, and just forgiving ourselves, whenever we have, an incident like that.
Yeah.
So self-worth, what does self-worth look like?
Yeah. Before I jump into that question, something you said about, forgiveness, that's something that's really huge. And I think a lot of people skip over that, forgiving yourself for being negative, in that
Right.
example is huge, because we might have an ambition or a goal to be positive or to have a certain mindset, but we are going to slip up. There's no guarantee that even if you've learned it a million times that you're going to be consistent with it, right? And if we can't forgive ourselves, like you said, we end up having shame about it or guilt about it. And shame and guilt are one of the biggest killers of joy, in my opinion. And you get to, once you get into like a shame cycle, it starts to be like a downward spiral. So we do have to learn how to forgive ourselves in various situations. So that way we can learn how to be kind to ourselves, which kind of does relate to self-worth, right? Because if we don't consider ourselves worthy of forgiveness or worthy of kindness, we're not going to be able to show ourselves love. And at the end of the day, if we can't show ourselves love, we can't truly show other people love as well.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, like, as ambitious people, I would consider myself pretty ambitious, got big dreams, big goals, big vision. And so like, you got to hold yourself to a high standard, to hit habits and like, hit goals at the same time. But then on the opposite spectrum is like, if you don't, do some of the things that you set out to do, it's okay, and forgiving yourself. So it's definitely a balance, it could be a tough balance if you're at the end of either extreme.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. And I think that's really the crux of what I work on for myself and what I strive to help other people with too, because you're right. It is a difficult balance. It's like, where do you draw the line? And, at the end of the day, it's just about picking yourself back up and dusting yourself off and realizing that you're not perfect and not expecting yourself to be perfect and not expecting other people to be perfect, and continuing to take one step at a time.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you watch the full episode here. And if you're not subscribed yet, make sure you click on the subscribe button. I really appreciate you watching. I'll see you in the next video.